Welcome to Disarming Leviathan, a podcast designed to equip you to missionally engage American Christian nationalists. For more info on today's guest and our suite of resources, visit disarmingleviathan.com.
Laurie, I have loved your book, The Gap in God's Country, which I highly recommend. You do a lot of work thinking deeply about not just the culture wars, but how we got here, and thinking about the changes in America, what's going on the ground. You weave together so many different viewpoints and folks who've been thinking deeply about the nature of not only humanity, but also humanity in America. So what led you to writing this book?
Well, I mean, my own personal story is somewhat instructive. I guess I would have fit the profile of somebody who might have been on the right hand side of the political equation about, I don't know, 15 years ago, or maybe a little less than that. I watched Fox News. I tended to vote Republican. I was married to a Republican. But at a certain point, I changed my position, and it was at a point when I sort of realized that that the party was kind of promoting a lot of division and a lot of divisiveness, and especially with the elevation of Trump to the leadership position candidacy. Even the first time, I just thought there's something else going on here, but I should explain, like, that was so I switched over into kind of political neutrality, but I had been through multiple changes in my past, and I've got a Ph.D. in political science. I'm a reader. I know quite a bit about politics and economics, but I myself had made these flip-flops in my political orientation, and I've gone through several iterations in my faith journey as well. And so at a certain point, I started to ask myself, and it was in the midst of the first Trump term, kind of, well, why was I not more solid or more kind of I don't know, steady this entire time? Why did I change my position? Because I started out my life as a fairly liberal, person, progressive, a Methodist, and then I was a Presbyterian, and then I became a Lutheran. And then I flipped my position in my 30s. And a big part of that had to do with how I was treated. When I look back and I thought about, why did I change my position from progressive to conservative? It was because of how I was treated in my job search, and stereotyped as a woman, scholar by fellow academics, and I don't like that. I never will like that. But I took it personally, and so when I really thought about it, I had flipped my position to begin with in politics because of a personal slight, my own feelings, my own life experience. It had nothing to do with my intellectual knowledge or anything like that. It really was kind of an emotional thing, right? And so when I got off of that train later, I'd like to think I was maybe thinking a little bit more clearly, but I definitely could see how other people could lean towards a sort of a MAGA position based on anger, because I myself had made political decisions based on anger and feelings of being slighted, not listened to, not cared about. And so that's what kind of led me to try to figure out at a deeper level. The first book I wrote on this was called Ideological Possession and the Rise of the New Right. It was published by Routledge. And that sort of like paved the way for The Gap in God's Country, because I was looking at, what are the psychological dynamics of these types of political attachments? What makes people kind of move into extremism? I looked at historical cases of extremism, including, fascism and mass movement communism. And, just trying to figure out like what is it that makes people kind of attach themselves so zealously to a political or a religious idea and then become divisive and sometimes even violent. And it's got a lot to do with human psychology and spirituality, actually, and very little to do with our brains, which is why when we argue with people on the basis of just reason alone, when we don't think they're going in the right way, it never works because it's not about that to begin with. I'm rambling anyway.
No, that's really good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. That we're oftentimes feeling ourselves into decisions rather than logicking ourselves into them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's right. So how have you seen, as you've done the work and the research in this book, what were some of your key takeaways?
Well, so I mean, one key takeaway is definitely that to a certain extent, economics has gotten us here. And now this isn't like a straightforward case where, capitalism is wrong and therefore we need to replace it, but just taking a good look at the dynamics of the developments of industrial capitalism and then later developments. We are not in the United States in industrial capitalism anymore. We are far from that, which is part of what people are now noticing. But, when this whole thing got started, there was very little attention, that is, maybe to say zero attention, being paid to what to do as capitalism transformed the workplace, what kind of work people did, where they worked. So I go back to England, where capitalism kind of got started in and around the 17th and 18th centuries, in and around there, where the people who had previously been lords of the manor and had all these peasants working on their lands and kind of living somewhat communally but also engaging in the market with their excess and so on. The lords decided to throw these people off in waves because they could make more money selling their land, or basically renting their land out to tenant farmers who then competed for rental space and created this market in rent. In the meantime, all these people, thousands and thousands of people, no planning, no planning. They all had to find some way to survive, no longer able to farm, no longer able to hunt or fish because they were basically forbidden from those lands. So they all crowd into the city looking for work, creating crime, creating problems. And that's kind of the beginning of the story. Never have we really anticipated the way in which these new economic dynamics churn communities, break up families, cause people to change and change and change again, and adapt and adapt. And at this point now, if you want to be successful in America, you may have to live on the other side of the country, if not the other side of the world, from your family. You cannot farm for the most part. It's extremely hard to get into farming because we have a globalized uh, farming system now. So it employs relatively few people, and our rural areas are decimated. Right there's the businesses have left. There's no thriving communities in a lot of these places anymore. And again, our society and a lot of others, I suppose, doesn't seem to care about the social and moral impacts of these changes. The message, I interviewed a bunch of farmers who went through this, in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. They were like, told you need to get bigger or get out. Either you afford this new big equipment and buy more land so that you can scale up, or you need to get out. And a lot of them got out, or their kids couldn't stay on the farm, or not all of them. And so, they said it was just like a force of nature, like we knew we had to either get big or get out. A lot of us couldn't do it. So, I said, well, who do you blame for that? And they say, well, nobody. It just is something that happened. So, like, our general tendency is to see this as something that just happens to us. The government doesn't plan for it. Nobody plans for it. And then we tend to blame the victim, right? So, If you've lost your job and you can't find another one, or you've lost your land and you can't retool and do something else, or you're struggling now because you don't want to go back to school for the third time to learn another trade when you were a programmer, but now that's not needed anymore because AI took over, then, it's your problem. So it's been centuries of this. Wendell Berry talks about this, that first we threw the Native Americans off their land. Then the settler farmers came, and then we threw them off their land, and everybody just is expected to. There's who is it? Wendy Brown says it's the word she uses is responsibilization. We make the individual responsible when they are more or less the victim of this constant motion. In all of human history, there's never been such constant change and motion. And so I think a lot of people, they just can't handle it, I mean, we've got a huge drug and alcohol problem in the Midwest here. We've got people who feel like they've been abandoned. I realize not everybody that's kind of become more extreme in their politics fits this image, but if you look at the map, the political map, there's this big old red column going right down the middle of the country, right? From top to bottom. What is that? Like that's our the less populous places are the places that are the deepest red and tend to have the most really angry people. And they may not even fully know why at this point they're so angry. And I'm not saying that economics is the only cause, but I'm saying that's a part of it. And it's something that we don't recognize very often. And if you start to talk about it, people will say, "Oh, you want socialism?" Well, not necessarily. I mean, maybe a little bit. We already have some, right? But at least like think about planning for this instead of blaming Americans for not being able to deal with in a mature, intelligent fashion for the umpteenth time to deal with the latest challenge to their very livelihoods,
Yeah. And you brought up Wendell Berry, who is so good at helping us think about our connection to the land and the soil and the place that we live and breathe. And you're noticing there's been rampant separation from our family of origin, the place that we belong. I mean, I'm first generation Phoenician, so I'm the first of my family that was born in Phoenix. Phoenix is a city predominantly of transplants. It's quadrupled in my lifetime.
Wow.
And I've also watched as the agrarian nature of the area has decreased or become automated. And
Mhm.
Barry hits on this, and you hit on this in your book, that we're being separated from the land in many different ways, not only geographically having to move into cities to get jobs, as you've mentioned, but also the mechanization of farming has meant that it's fewer people. A family can't sustain itself with multiple children to take the farm. If I'm not mistaken, right now there's a lawsuit against John Deere for farmers to be able to work on their own machines.
Yeah, the right to repair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the right to repair, which is rapid change in 2 generations.
Mhm.
And as you've explored that, what do you see that doing to the culture or our communities as we think about how we're woven together? What impact is that having on us?
Right. So you can't really have strong community and strong cultural practices and traditions unless people live in the same general place for a while, for like a few generations, really, ideally at least, but at least most of one's life. And because it takes time to get to know people, to make agreements, to get accustomed to, working with them, compromising with them. And so if we can't do that, we can't really accomplish true human culture in the best sense of the word.
Hmm.
And so what we do is we try to create a simulacra of that through joining particular groups, or, dwelling on the internet and finding, niche groups to kind of identify with, or sometimes like personal style choices and kind of statements can, fit into that too. I find myself thinking, and I'm this type of person like everybody else. Oh, how can I kind of make myself a unique individual when I'm more or less like in the mass of people in this increasingly alienated environment, right? How can I stand out? And I start thinking about things like my personal style. Well, this is a weird place to go, when you're trying to think about your identity. In most of our human history, your identity has been given to you largely by your community. And your identity is in relationship with the people around you and their traditions. And if you stand out against that or within that, but that is still there. And it's not there now. So we're sort of in this vacuum. And again, like human beings have never experienced anything like this unless they've been driven out, like completely driven out, like a diaspora situation where, everything changes fundamentally very quickly and you have to adapt. But this is not how, people are naturally supposed to live. We are the products of a lot of, a lot of evolution, a lot of like history. And I don't think that our psychology was made for this. And that's why we desperately flounder around trying to find something to replace the embeddedness that we would normally feel within a stronger community setting.
Yeah. Do you have a sense this disconnectedness, this longing for identity, the meaning making nature of community being disrupted? Do you have a sense, is that maybe a reason why so many people are being driven towards identity politics or even religious politics or religiousized politics?
No, definitely. Yes, right. It's only when you feel, I think, this alienated and you don't feel embedded in a larger sense of who you are, where you fit in, that you will go shopping for an identity and try to see what fits you. And I think everybody longs for that, right? Longs to have a tribe, longs to have a place where they feel like they do belong and where they speak sort of the same language and this type of thing. And yeah, I do think even with churches, which is why, I mean, normally the church would be a part of this larger cultural reality, right? But now it too is among the contenders for people shopping around looking for, a place to land and to kind of create this simulacra of community. And we see that in the way that a lot of modern churches they kind of sell themselves, and then gauge like, oh, what can we say and what can we do to kind of bring the most people in, and how can we kind of give people, what. Now, I'm not saying all of that is bad, but I mean, it's a competitive environment, right, in which many different churches and other groups are competing for people's attention. And so there's a tendency to put oneself out there in that marketplace kind of way. And I think that it's not good. I see a lot of churches kind of conforming to the model of marketing, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and kind of promising things that they can't deliver. Like, if you're going to tell me that any church is going to replace, say, my family, or is going to, I mean, a church could provide community. I think some do, many do not, but a lot of them promise it because we use that term community really loosely, right? Like, community isn't just some people you get together with and talk to. every once in a while. It's people that you can rely on to have your back and to dig you out of a hole and work for you if necessary. And you should be able to do the same. And that is so rare for us today in any respect, whether it's in church or any of the other groups that we might join. I mean, here we have here in Kansas, we have these service groups like Kiwanis and Rotary and stuff like that. And I have been a part of one of those, and I can tell you, because I've seen it many times, a person can give their whole life to one of those, and a month after they die, they stop talking about you because you never were really a member of a community. You were a member of a service club. You know what I'm saying? So, like, people are putting way too much, I guess, credibility into those things that were never built to be, to provide that level of belonging. And so they're dissatisfied. It dissatisfies people.
So for many of us, we're having these experiences as well. We're feeling disconnected. We're wondering, to whom do we belong? For many of us, especially listeners of this podcast, there is a disorientation that's come as of late of, the people that I thought I was a part of, they're starting to call me names, telling me I'm an outsider because I don't line up completely with them on a political agenda, or I don't want to fight a culture war. And so now I've been excused from the communion.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us are trying to, so we're experiencing that disorientation, but we're also trying to connect or reconnect with people who are really angry or ragey, and they're pointing to some of the things that you're highlighting. What coaching would you give to us as we've got friends and family members who are victims of some of these forces that are at work, whether they know it or not, and they're exhibiting hurtful behavior. Sometimes their rhetoric can even be violent and dehumanizing. So what coaching would you give to us as we're thinking about, okay, well, how do I approach my family member? How do I talk to my friends? Give us some coaching based on the work that you've done.
Well, so I guess first of all, my book tries to emphasize all the ways in which people who become like that have been more or less victimized by various forces, right? Been taken advantage of. One of the things that people don't maybe learn, especially if they're in that type of milieu, is just how many, for instance, how long the history is of pastors that are like big names who just take advantage of people. So maybe maybe a little bit of studying that would help. But I would say first go into your meeting with those folks thinking of them more as victims. I know it's kind of hard because they want to make you mad, right? But also, if you really take a step back, and this is what the book on ideological possession was about, and then I've got a chapter in here on ideological and another one on religious strong-arming. These ideological movements are tapping into these deep emotional and psychological needs. They resonate with real religious longings and kind of masquerade as them. And so I think that we need to see them as, take your pick, either ideologically possessed or having somewhat of a psychological problem. Now, we all have some problems psychologically, right? But when one gets to the obsessive stage where all of your human relations are boiled down into, are you with us or are you against us, and becoming very hateful and sometimes violent, I think you're dealing with a true psychological phenomenon, which is very difficult to break, and it is akin to a kind of mental illness. It is a mass mental illness of sorts, but when you think about it, I mean, we've known for centuries that when people get into crowds, They lose their moral rudder. They stop thinking very well. They become less objective. And so the more people that get on this bandwagon, the more validating it becomes. So anyway, like I don't try to reason with, I don't throw facts at people like that are in that category. And I do have some of them in my life. Now, some of them, I will say this, if they are abusive, in my opinion, you should just leave them alone, because I don't think anybody should ever put up with abuse of any kind. However, if they're just kind of like negative and grouchy and like disapproving, and you're not living with them, then I would say um, bypass talking politics or religion for quite a while and just do things together or do things for them. I've had quite a bit of success of just like doing things for people. I garden, so I'll just bring people food, and they like that inevitably, and then I'll get something back from them. Well, now the more that you kind of like just establish some sort of form of friendship at that very basic level, they got to do something. They most likely are going to put you into the exception category of, even though you don't believe exactly like they do, you're an exception. But then that cracks open a little bit of light. And I think it takes time, but I don't think there's any other way to go other than just basically liking them, or I guess loving them anyway. One thing I found is, in dealing with folks like this in my own life, I want to not like them, but uh, but I nevertheless do. And God wants us to like and love people, and so like actually when you just do it, you kind of relax. And then all their weirdness doesn't like bother you as much either, because you're just sort of giving into your natural tendency to just go, I love you anyway. Um, I don't know, like, but and also doing things for them makes you, the closer into contact you come with them, you see them as like an individual human being too, right? And not a category, because there are other facets to their lives. Even though they're quite obsessive and negative and angry. And I just think, that type of thing will throw some people off and make them begin to rethink. But obviously, like, the only thing that may make some people rethink is just failure. And that works like a charm in most of human history, I will say. Like, when people really fail, when it really crumbles, then people rethink inevitably. So, like, there's only so much that people can do, but that's what I would recommend. Go into it with empathy, realizing like I didn't go extreme, but like I could see that I myself was somewhat dominated by my emotions, and I've gone through pretty angry periods in my life, and we are not perfect. I mean, how many of us spend an extraordinary amount of time bad mouthing them, right? When we could be spending it doing something more positive, right? So like we're not all good either. So like I think keeping that in mind will hopefully help. And the book is all about saying, hey, these are all the things that led up to this, and it's not just America; it's the world. And so we've got to solve these bigger problems, economic problems, problems building community, making it more easy for people to stay put in one place, handling automation, because we are facing just almost a crisis of rapid automation.
Yeah.
We've got to figure it out.
Yeah. So maybe as we conclude our time together, I'd love to nerd out a little bit. You pull from a variety of different authors and thinkers so wonderfully in your book, one of which is Charles Taylor, who I've been fascinated by what he's brought to the table. Tell us how does Charles Taylor's work on enchantment, the secular world, how does that impact your work, and what would be a lesson that we could take away for us today?
Mm-hmm. Well, Taylor tries to explain why and how we became disenchanted in modernity, meaning that it became harder for people to believe in God, to believe in kind of the what he calls the white magic of the church, the sacramentality, the beautiful aspects of religion. Why it became harder for people to believe in the miraculous. He also talks about, how we became disembedded, right, in modernity as well. So the loss of community, and the two kind of go hand in hand. And he talks about how, to a certain extent, this was accidental, but also it has to do with human nature. So, as I won't belabor this, but as people, even before the Protestant Reformation, as Christians tried to become more pure and to move the purity from just being like the province of the priests and the nuns to the people, over time Christians developed this tendency to engineer societies to try to kind of shape people's behavior and to hopefully help them towards holiness and moral purity. In the Protestant Reformation, that tendency kind of ramped up a little bit. So, the expression of that in America was, among other things, the Salem witch trial phenomenon and that kind of thing. But, Calvin's Geneva would be an excellent example of trying to use like the political structure and the laws to create a better, more moral, more efficient, society. And the problem with this, from Taylor's perspective, he's a dialectical thinker. So, we move this way, but then this countervailing thing comes in. The problem with this is that once people began to realize the power that they wielded at not just the level of, controlling people's behavior, because people have always, leaders have always tried to control people's behavior, but the power that could be wielded in controlling people's minds and hearts, this is where the very kernel of totalitarianism came in, right there. Because then some people began to see, oh, this kind of governmental power can be used regardless of what the aims are, religious or not. And that's where Leviathan comes from, right? The name of your podcast, right, is Leviathan. Hobbes's Leviathan was an articulation of the modern nation state to, use sovereignty and use the law to make people orderly, but not for Christian purity, but for, power and wealth. So that's the tragedy kind of that Taylor tells in this book, A Secular Age. And but he also like leaves an open crack, because he does recognize that we are still prone to enchantment because of the way that we're built. But our enchantment tendency, our tendency to desire that enchantment, to believe in something bigger than power and wealth, has like been channeled into our, belief in governments, in political figures, and mass movements. He just hints at that,
Yeah.
right? But that insight goes along with some of my other research. I really think that's true. It's not that we're disenchanted, we are misenchanted.
Mm.
And so, we're committing idolatry without knowing it, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's
We're
so good.
still, we're still believers.
That's so good. Yeah. Misenchanted.
Mhm.
I'm going to meditate on that for a while.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to come back and talk more about that
Yeah, me
with
too.
some.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Laurie, thank you so much for being on. Where can people find you and your work?
So I am part of something called the Morin Academy. It was named after Peter Morin, who's the co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement. And so you can find us at pmorin.org. That's PMAURIN morinacademy.org. And you can also just Google me. I have a YouTube channel called Political Philosophy, Dr. Laurie Johnson, that covers a lot of stuff, but it's part of the Morin Academy. So, yeah, we teach classes. We have a couple of podcasts. And so, yeah, I hope people will check that out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Laurie.
Thank you.